They laughed when she said she'd build the bed over the stove. They called it foreign nonsense, heathen fire trap, Chinaman's dream. But no one was laughing when the mountain winds came shrieking down that gorge and froze every creek from timberline to prairie, and her children slept warm with half the wood the men burned. The first laughter came before the boards were even nailed. Martha Lynn Wexler had stood in the dirt clearing with her 2 sons and 1 daughter, the latter still swaddled and blinking from the womb no more than 3 months, and unrolled the crude drawing with shaking hands. Wind tugged the corners of the soot-stained paper, but she held tight, kneeling beside the fire pit that would become her hearth. "It's a bed," she muttered to herself more than to the boys. "But you sleep on top of the stone, and the fire underneath heats it. The flue goes up through the back wall." "I ain't sleeping on no rocks," said the older boy, Sam, who was 10. His brother Elijah was 7, thin and watchful. Neither could read yet, but they watched their mother's knuckles go white, gripping that paper like it was all she had left from their pa, which it was. That fall had taken him, a tree, a saw cut too deep, a gust at the wrong second. No one in the ridge came to help move the body, and none would help her now. The forest of oaks and pines surrounding their plot rustled with dry laughter, or maybe that was just the gossip already building from the neighboring cabins. By the 3rd day, when Martha began laying stones not for the hearth but for a wide, flat surface beside it, nearly the size of a bed, the visits began. "What you building there, Widow Wexler?" asked Mr. Haynes, boots crunching in the frost just before noon. "A stove," she answered without looking up, sweat lining her brow though the wind was sharp enough to bite skin. "And a bed." He chuckled like he thought she was being clever. When she didn't smile, he did instead. "I seen one of them once. Some Chinaman settler in Idaho smoked his family out the first snow and burned off the roof." "It won't smoke," Martha muttered, placing another flat stone and tapping it level. "You'd be better off digging a cellar and stacking the beds close." "I'm not asking you." "You will be, come January." He left, but others came, with advice, with warnings, with smirks. None stayed to help. A woman building her own chimney bed stove. That was something for the whisper circle in the trading post, not something serious. But every night, once the children were asleep on straw near the fire, she studied that paper. It had been drawn by a Chinese man who worked with her husband once in Kansas. Kang, her husband had called it. A Kang bed stove. It used radiant heat, warmed bricks beneath a person, and held the heat all night after the fire went out. No updraft. No need to keep stoking, just careful, controlled burning under a chambered floor. Not a single settler on the ridge had one, and she'd be the first. She had to be, because the woodpile was already half what the men had, and the boys couldn't carry full loads from the slope like a grown man could. And the baby coughed at night when the fire got too low, and sometimes she woke up numb in her fingers, afraid to reach for her and feel her cold. So she laid stones, then bricks, then clay. She dug a flue that snaked from the small firebox through a hollow chamber beneath the future bed, sloping gently up to meet the vertical chimney. It was slow work. She burned her arm once, and kept building. She cracked a brick in her foot, limped for a week, and kept working. And by the time the frost stopped melting in the mornings, when the sun would rise and the children's breath still fogged in the new half-built cabin, the Kang was finished. A rectangle of packed, clay-covered stone bricks stood waist-high next to the chimney wall. On top, a wide-board bed frame held 2 thick wool blankets and every scrap of quilting she had left. Underneath, the firebox could be accessed from the cabin's side, so no heat was lost opening the door. The smoke flue curved through the stove bed, drawing the heat evenly. The children didn't understand at first. "Why we sleeping on the stove?" Elijah asked. "It won't burn you. Lie down." She had lit the fire underneath 20 minutes earlier, a slow flame that had crept through the flue and warmed the stone to a surprising steady glow. Sam sat on it first. "It's warm," Elijah joined him. Then Martha laid the baby down between them, and for the first time in weeks she didn't lie awake worrying about the cold. Sneaking under the door, she slept, and the laughter from outside began to fade, until December came. The first blizzard hit early, an ice storm that bent pines and turned the trails into glass. Every cabin went dark that night as the winds howled through the ridge. Firewood ran low for some. A few men stayed up stoking fires hour by hour, trying to keep children from freezing in the corners of their square-walled cabins. But in the Wexler home, a single armload of wood burned in the firebox beneath the Kang, and the boys slept warm all night, the baby breathing easy between them. Martha cried from relief that morning, but no one outside knew, until Sam bragged. "I slept so warm, I didn't even need the blanket," he said too loudly at the creek when the Haynes boy came to break ice. "My ma built a Chinaman stove. We don't burn near as much wood as y'all," the Haynes boy told his pa. And 2 days later, there was a knock on the Wexler door. Mr. Haynes didn't come inside. He just looked at the baby, pink-cheeked, at the boys still sleeping though the morning had begun, at the firebox under the bed, smoldering with nothing more than a few sticks. Then he left. The next day, Martha saw men measuring the stones on the edge of their clearings. No one laughed now. But something else came. The coldest month in memory, the real test, and something Martha hadn't counted on. Because what good was a warm bed if the cold outside was about to do more than freeze the creeks? It would come for the animals, for the chimney, for the roof itself. And someone was watching her cabin from the edge of the tree line. A man, or the shadow of one. And the snow around him never melted. The man had no horse, no fire, and no coat worth the name. Yet every time Martha looked through the frost-ringed window, he was standing the same way, halfway hidden behind a juniper snag at the far edge of her clearing, where the timber thinned out to the ridge trail, like the snow couldn't touch him, like the cold didn't want him. For 3 days, he never stepped closer, and for 3 nights, Martha refused to light the Kang bed's firebox until she'd blocked the view with a hanging blanket. She trusted the design. She didn't trust the silence beyond her cabin walls. But the cold was worsening. The wind didn't just hiss, it screamed. One night, the gale ripped the chimney cap from the peak and sent it spinning into the darkness. Sam found it half buried 3 yards downslope, bent and rimed with ice. That same morning, Elijah's eyes were bloodshot, and the baby had developed a rasp to her breath. They needed warmth. And even if the Kang only used a third the firewood, she was still burning too fast through the little they had. The woodlot she'd split and stacked through October had softened under snow. She hadn't tarped the top well enough, and now the logs hissed with wetness. Worse, the snowbanks had buried the back shed's kindling pile. Sam tried to dig, but the cold cracked the skin at his knuckles, and Elijah cried when his fingers turned white. That was the night she saw the figure again. Closer, not at the edge of the woods now, but halfway across the clearing, still unmoving, still upright, as if he had stepped forward without a trail, without tracks, without even sound. She stood at the window, arms crossed, baby asleep in her sling, and felt the heat of the Kang radiating behind her back like a heartbeat. "What do you want?" She didn't say it aloud. She just stared back, and the figure turned and walked away, finally breaking the spell. But the fear remained, not fear of men. She'd faced enough of those, in the post and in court and on the trail west. Not even fear of the dark, but a fear deeper and more ancient, that she had built something warm and good in a world not meant for such things, and that the cold wanted it undone. On the 4th night, Sam woke her with a whisper. "There's someone knocking." She blinked. Shadows played on the ceiling from the small fire beneath the bed. The wind was gone for the moment, and the silence outside had that thick, muffled quality that came with snowfall, the kind that smothered every sound and waited to surprise you with how deep it had gotten. Another knock, soft, measured, not a man's urgency, but a slow, tapping insistence. Martha stood, eased the baby from her chest, and wrapped herself in the oilcloth coat. Sam and Elijah sat up, tense. She opened the door with the old squirrel gun tucked behind her back. Nothing, just snow falling quietly. But when she stepped outside, she saw them, the tracks, not boots, bare feet, clear, adult-sized, with no signs of limping or frostbite, just a straight path in through snow nearly 2 feet deep, and no path out. Martha didn't scream. She stepped back inside and barred the door. Her hands shook as she leaned the rifle against the doorframe and sat down hard on the Kang edge. "They're watching us," she muttered. Sam nodded slowly. Elijah whispered, "What do they want?" Martha didn't know, but the cold deepened that night. They had to burn extra just to keep the Kang's surface warm enough for the baby, and she hated using 2 days' worth of kindling in one night. She swore the firewood pile was shrinking faster than it should have. 3 days later, the storm broke. The sky cleared, the sun shone, but it was a cruel, brittle light, the kind that fooled your eyes and still froze your breath in seconds. Martha took the boys outside with the sled. They had no choice. They had to harvest more wood before the next squall. "You boys load," she said. "I'll split." She kept the axe close and her eyes closer to the tree line. Sam found the first body, a rabbit, whole, unbitten, unbloody, lying belly up in the middle of the sled track. Its eyes were open, its paws curled like it had simply lain down and never moved again. "What happened to it?" Elijah asked. Martha didn't answer. She picked it up, still soft, not frozen, and placed it gently beside the sled. It wasn't there before. Something had put it there. "Keep working," she said. They felled 3 trees that day. Martha's shoulders burned with every swing, but she never stopped. The boys dragged the trunks toward the cabin as fast as they could, knowing well what nightfall might bring. But the second body waited at the door when they returned. A fox, also untouched. No wounds, no snow on the fur, just laying there, like it had brought itself, like it was an offering. Elijah cried when she buried it. Sam stared at the woods, eyes squinting, fists clenched. That night she built a bigger fire than any so far, and halfway through the dark, she finally understood. They weren't just watching the warmth, they needed it. The dreams began the next night, not hers, Sam's. He thrashed on the Kang bed, sweat beading on his forehead even though the cabin was cold. "They're in the floor," he muttered. "They're under the stone." "Elijah," Martha said, shaking her younger son awake. "Fetch me the pail." Elijah stumbled toward the wash bucket, but halfway across the floor he stopped. The pail had moved. It now sat beside the Kang. Martha hadn't placed it there. "Did you?" Elijah shook his head slowly. Martha took the pail, dipped it, and pressed the cold water to Sam's forehead. When he blinked awake, his first words chilled her more than the outside air. "They were warm," he said it softly, reverently, like someone speaking of heaven. "The people under the stone, they were warm, and they thanked me." Martha didn't sleep that night, not from fear, but from the realization that they weren't alone, and hadn't been, not since the Kang was built. By mid-January, the Wexler home was the only cabin on the ridge not blanketed in frost inside. At the trading post, the talk had changed. No one mocked the Chinaman stove now. Some men asked questions, rough and wary. "How much wood's it burn? You got plans for it? It true you ain't had to relight not once?" One even asked if she'd marry again, just so he could sleep warm. She told him no. And they all noticed the children looked too well fed, too pink-cheeked, too rested for a winter like this. So when someone stole 2 logs from the Wexler woodshed, she wasn't surprised. But she was surprised when the thief came back the next night, screaming. It was Buckram Peters, big as a bear, red-faced and drunk most days. He'd been laughing about chink sorcery just the week before. He stumbled into the post barefoot, hollering about figures in the snow and whispers from under the bed. "They came up through the flue," he bellowed. "Their hands were black stone. Their eyes, Lord, their eyes." They found him fevered, no signs of injury, but his boots were gone. So was the stolen wood. And that same night, Martha heard laughter from under the Kang. Not her children's, not her own, but faint and old, like a memory of warmth, like something that had lived in stone and fire long before the ridge was ever settled. She didn't tell the boys, but she did one thing different the next morning. She stoked the firebox early. Then she scattered fresh tea leaves on the Kang's stone bed, and she whispered, "Thank you," just once. And the stones stayed warm till morning. Even though the fire had long gone out, the warmth never failed again. No matter how thin the fire burned, how green the logs smoked, or how bad the wind roared across the ridge, the stones of the Kang held their heat, more than they should have, longer than they should have. At first Martha thought it was just luck, a well-built flue, a good draft. The clay sealed tight, but by mid-February, she stopped pretending it was only that. Because even on mornings, when she forgot to light the fire, the bed was still warm. Even when the chimney rattled with hoarfrost and no smoke had passed through for a full day, the stone never felt cold, not even once. The boys began calling it the warm bed. Elijah said he dreamed of fields of sunflowers when he slept on it. Sam claimed he saw summer in his dreams every night, real summer, with bees and honeysuckle and sweat behind the ears. The baby, too young for words, cooed and kicked her feet on that stone like she was floating in a bath. But it wasn't just the warmth, it was the presence, a hush, low and solemn, like prayer, a gentle weight in the cabin's air, as if something had taken residence in the flue itself and sat there humming beneath the bricks. No footsteps, no voices, only the sense that the stove was no longer just stone and clay and fire. It was inhabited. She told no one, because no one would have believed her, and those who might have, she didn't want visiting. That same week, the neighbors began to fail, cabin by cabin, ridge by ridge. The frost didn't just bite, it settled inside. Timber warped, logs split. Chimneys cracked with the ice. One man's hearthstone exploded from within. The cold too deep, the fire inside too strong. 3 children died that night, their blankets soaked through when snow drifted in through a shattered wall. Another cabin burned when a mother fell asleep trying to stoke her dying flame. They found her boy curled around her blackened body, still clutching the unburnt log she'd meant to place in the stove. Martha stood at the edge of their burial and said nothing. She felt her baby stir against her chest, swaddled and sleeping. The warmth of the Kang had clung to the child even in the open air. She wanted to leave, not from guilt, but because she could feel the eyes. They weren't just from the woods anymore. The other settlers had begun to notice her children's skin was too soft, that their cheeks were too pink, that they hadn't aged from the cold like the other children had. Sam still ran like it was October. Elijah still whittled with bare hands. The baby, Lord help her, had never once wheezed since the Kang had been finished. "She don't even cough," said one woman in the trading post, not hiding her bitterness. "Not even when the frost took my Reba's breath away." "Not even once?" murmured another. They stared at Martha like she was hiding fire in her veins, but she said nothing. She bought what she needed, turned her coat collar high, and left. She didn't hear what was said behind her, but she didn't need to. Fear changes people, and envy changes them faster. The next knock on her door came with boots, 6 pairs. It was dusk, and she'd just finished cleaning out the firebox when the thudding started. Not a polite rap this time. Real knocks, heavy and sharp. Sam reached for the rifle. "No," Martha said, stepping between him and the door. "Take your brother, sit on the bed, don't speak." They obeyed, but the silence between them said more than any words could. She opened the door just a crack, enough to see their faces. Mr. Haynes, Mr. Rourke, Will Holder from downriver. 2 more she didn't recognize, and 1 she did. Preacher Delaney. They were wrapped in furs and wool, but none looked warm. "Mornin'," Haynes said, though it was near dark. "It's dusk." He nodded like he hadn't noticed. "We heard you got a stove that burns hot all night with barely a stick of wood." "It burns what's needed." "You share those plans with anyone?" "I shared them with no one," she said. "Not even my own boys." Delaney stepped forward. "It's not right," he said softly, "what you're doing in there. I'm keeping my children alive. There's warmth and there's witchcraft." Martha didn't blink. "Is that what you've come to decide?" "We've buried 9 in 3 weeks, Delaney said, "and yours are pink as peaches in May. Maybe you should have built smarter." "That's not it," Haynes growled. "You've brought something in." A silence fell. The snow blew lightly behind them, hissing across the porch planks. From inside, the Kang gave off a faint glow. No flame, just radiating heat like a heartbeat. "You've got no proof," Martha said, "and no law says I have to let you in. We can make our own law," muttered one of the men she didn't know, and that was when Sam opened the door fully from inside. "I dare you," he said, rifle steady in his hands. Elijah stood behind him, holding the baby. Her tiny hand reached toward the men with open fingers, unaware of the danger. Delaney flinched at the sight of the child. "She don't even shiver." Martha stepped forward. "Get off my porch." For a moment no one moved. Then Haynes looked past her, at the bed, the boys, the glow, and something in him faltered. Maybe it was the same thing she felt. That warmth wasn't just a gift, it was a warning. He turned. The others followed, except one. The youngest, no more than 20, lingered a moment longer. "What's it like?" he asked. "What?" "Sleeping on it." Martha looked him in the eye. "It feels like someone's praying for you all night." That night, she slept lighter than ever, and halfway through the dark, she heard the baby whispering, not babbling, whispering, soft sounds, repeated, like mimicry. She turned, blinked through the dimness, and saw the child staring up at the ceiling, smiling. "Who's there?" she whispered. Nothing, but the stones beneath her felt warm, warmer than they should. She stood, walked across the room to fetch water and paused near the firebox. The stones inside glowed faintly, even though no fire had been lit. A low sound hummed through the chimney, like chanting, like breath. She dipped the ladle, drank, and said aloud, "Whatever you are, thank you." She didn't know if it heard, but when she returned to bed, the baby was already asleep, and the Kang had grown warmer. The last storm hit in early March, too late for such a freeze, or so the settlers had thought. The winds came with shrieking vengeance, toppling trees, breaking roofs, blowing snow sideways so thick the trails disappeared within hours. Cabins collapsed. Men died alone in sheds trying to save goats. Children froze in lofts before parents could reach them. The Wexler cabin shook, but held. The Kang never cooled. Sam stood by the door all night with the rifle in hand. Elijah wept in his sleep. The baby grew feverish from the heat, and Martha sat upright beside the stove bed, hands folded in her lap, watching the flame inside the firebox, which was now no flame at all, just a red glow that pulsed like a living thing. She did not sleep, because something was coming, something that had seen too much warmth in one place, too much life in one winter, too much defiance. She felt it in the wind, heard it in the snow, and knew the others would not survive. Morning came like a mercy. The wind died, the clouds broke, but the world outside was white and broken. 12 cabins lost, nearly 20 dead. No horses survived. A silence blanketed the valley, and through that silence came the knock, not at the door, not at the window, but from under the bed. 3 soft taps, from inside the flue, beneath the stone. Then silence again. Martha knelt, pressed her palm to the Kang. It was hot, too hot. The boys stirred, the baby coughed, and the snow outside began to melt. Only around their cabin, steam rose from the banks. The roof shed snow faster than sunlight could explain. The chimney wept like spring. She stood, opened the door, and saw them, figures, down the ridge, in the woods, along the trail. Dozens, wrapped in shawls and rags, Families clinging to each other, staggering through waist-deep snow. Survivors, drawn to the only cabin that hadn't gone cold. She didn't shut the door. She left it open and fed the Kang more wood. It burned too hot now, but she didn't care. Let them come, let them see, let them sleep one night without fear. She could explain the plans later, could show them the drawings, but not now. Now, they needed warmth, and the Kang, whatever lived inside it, would provide, even if the price hadn't yet been named. By mid-morning, the trail was packed with footprints, not from boots alone, but dragging sleds, bare feet, children carried slung over shoulders or wrapped in quilts too thin to block the wind. A line of human wreckage trickled toward the Wexler place like runoff, like thaw, like a great migration of the last half-frozen and half-hopeful souls in the valley who hadn't yet succumbed to the freeze. They came because they'd heard. No one said it outright, not in the way men talk in saloons or around a post. This was something quieter, carried like a cough from one deathbed to another. A whisper on chapped lips passed between graves. They said the widow's children hadn't frozen. They said her fire burned with no smoke. They said her bed glowed red through the floor, like embers from the earth itself. And now, as the sun cracked across a ruined tree line and revealed 24 cabins that would never hold another voice, the Wexler place stood upright. It steamed in the morning light, warm enough to melt snow for 20 yards in each direction. The logs bled sap, the roof dripped, the windows gleamed with no frost. The first family arrived near dawn, the Hewitts, husband, wife, 2 girls barely walking, their cheeks wind-burned raw, the man's knuckles black with frostbite. "We got nowhere," he said, not begging but already half collapsing on her porch. "Ours is gone. Please." Martha only stepped aside. "Leave your boots. Keep your coats on the hook." The second came before noon. A boy named Caleb who'd lost both parents to fever in January. He stood alone, 17 maybe, holding a baby goat wrapped in burlap. "I heard," was all he said. "You heard right," Martha said, holding the door open. "Don't wake the baby." By the time the sun reached the pine tops, there were 19 people under her roof. She did the math in her head, counting bodies, firewood, blankets, spoons. Her food would last maybe 3 days, less if she shared the cornmeal. The roof could hold, maybe, but the weight of that many bodies might cause the rafters to creak or sag by next snow. But the Kang held. Even as the air grew tight with breath and movement and murmur, the stone bed glowed. Its heat reached corners it had never touched before. Children sat cross-legged on the floor, cheeks flushed not with fever but warmth. An old man wept silently near the hearth and muttered that his cabin had crushed his daughter while he was out gathering bark to chew. Martha fed him tea. Sam stood watch by the door. Elijah helped a mother bandage her child's hands. The baby slept through it all, curled in a sling beside the Kang's edge, smiling in her dreams. At dusk, the wind picked up again, and someone screamed. The man had arrived silently. No one had seen him approach. He stood on the far side of the clearing, not near the trail, not near the woods, but dead center in the drifted snow, where the midday sun had failed to melt a patch of crusted white. He wore no coat. He had no face, or rather, his face had no expression. It was human, surely, but so devoid of emotion, it seemed carved from ash. Skin pulled tight over skull, eyes like coals pressed into clay. He raised one arm slowly, not a wave, not a signal, just a gesture, and the Kang inside the cabin flared. Martha screamed, not from pain but instinct, as heat shot through the flue like a flash of lightning. The firebox glowed white for a heartbeat, then subsided, and the man was gone, not vanished, simply gone. As if he'd never stood there. Outside, the snow remained untouched. Inside, silence fell. Then a sound from the Kang, knocking. 3 soft, measured raps from underneath the bed. The boy named Caleb rose. "He was the one who saved me," he said aloud. Martha turned. "What? I saw him. That night the wind came. I was alone in the barn. I thought I was dead, but I woke up warm, like I'd been sleeping on a stone that held the sun." Another knock. This time, 4 raps. Faster, urgent. The baby stirred. Then the old man by the hearth began to mutter again. "Too many," he said. "Too many now. You can't ask them for more. You can't." "Who?" Martha asked. But he only stared at the Kang, wide-eyed and shivering, though the air was hot enough to sweat. By midnight, she knew something had changed. The Kang's surface, always firm and dry, now felt soft at the corners, not melting but pliable, like leather stretched tight over a drum. When she pressed her palm to the stone, it gave a little, not enough to alarm, just enough to say, "I am not what you thought I was." The guests lay sleeping across every corner of the floor. Sam dozed upright by the window, Elijah curled with the baby in the sling, and Martha stood alone near the stove, listening. She heard it now, not knocking, breathing, a long, slow inhale, then pause, then exhale, echoing up the flue. She stepped closer, laid her ear to the Kang, and the sound became clearer. Voices, not speaking, humming, a low rhythmic tone like a dozen monks humming in a stone room underground. Wordless, yet somehow familiar. It pulsed with the heat, rising and falling in harmony with the radiant warmth. Then, a whisper, not from the Kang, from behind her. "You fed them," it said. She spun. Nothing, just the room. But every candle had gone out, and the firebox now glowed dim blue, not red. She stepped back, stumbled onto the Kang, and caught herself on the edge, and felt it. The Kang was no longer warm from the fire. It was warm from within, as if something alive and ancient lay inside the stone, breathing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Then she saw the crack, a line across the far corner, hair-thin but glowing. The Kang was opening. She didn't scream. She covered the crack with a quilt, tucked it tight, and turned back to the room. No one else stirred. But in the silence, she heard another voice, her husband's, not a memory, not a dream, real. It came from the firebox, faint and hollow. "Martha," it said, "it's safe here." She fell to her knees. "Tom, don't fear," the voice whispered. "They kept me warm. They'll keep you too." Tears flooded her eyes. She reached toward the glow, but it faded, just slightly, and the whisper changed. "But you must give something." Martha froze. Give what? No answer, just silence and warmth. The next morning, one child wouldn't wake, a girl, 7 years old, from the McDermott family. She'd gone to sleep near the Kang, curled up against the brick edge, smiling. Her parents found her still smiling, but she was cold, not frozen, just cold, the only cold body in the whole cabin. Martha said nothing. She checked the Kang. The crack had widened, a little. She laid her hand on it. It pulsed beneath. That day more people arrived, 8 more, and another died that night. A man this time. No wounds, no frost, just gone. Peaceful, warm. On the third night, Martha stood beside the Kang with her sons and said aloud, "It's feeding on us." Sam's jaw tightened. "Then stop it." "I can't," she said. "Not without freezing the rest," Elijah whispered. "It's only taken 2. "And it'll take more," she replied. "That's the cost." "For what?" "For the warmth." They stood in silence. The baby slept beside them, flushed and cooing. Then Sam asked the question she'd been avoiding. "Did Pa build it for this?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. But she did know that the Kang was no longer a stove. It was a covenant, and they'd all already signed it. By week's end, the Ridge knew that those who stayed near the Wexler place survived, but not all who entered left. A few tried to carry off the heat. One man stole a brick from the Kang while Martha was sleeping. He fled down the trail, holding it in a burlap sack. They found him frozen stiff halfway to Haynes Creek. The sack was empty. The brick had returned, already back in the Kang by morning. That day, Martha made a decision. She barred the door. Only those already inside could stay. No more would be let in. Not for food, not for warmth, not for mercy. The Kang was growing hotter, hungrier, and she could feel the stone shifting beneath their feet, like something big and patient was waking up. And it would not stop. Not until the snow was gone. Not until the valley burned. The crack across the Kang was no longer hairline. By the second week of March, it ran a full hand span, glowing softly day and night, thin curls of steam rising from it even when the firebox lay empty. No one touched it, no one asked. But everyone inside the cabin felt it, that quiet, impossible warmth filling the room, more reliable than the sun, more forgiving than any man had ever been to them. They didn't speak of the deaths anymore. The girl, the man, the twins last Wednesday, curled together like seed pods, lips still pink but breath long gone. Their mother hadn't cried, only pulled them away from the Kang and wrapped them in the heavy quilt. She whispered, "Thank you," as she kissed their hair. Martha saw her kiss the stone too. No one left now. The door stayed shut, nailed from the inside. The trail was gone anyway, vanished under hard-crusted drifts that cracked like ice shelves when walked on. You couldn't leave even if you wanted. The snow had become a wall, and the cabin sat in the center of a crater. Warm, dry, steaming like a forge. The last refuge on a ridge entirely buried in white silence. Inside, people whispered less and slept more. Some began to call the Kang by name, not the stove, not bed. They whispered things in their sleep, half-formed syllables, strange vowels, never quite the same, never quite human. And sometimes when one murmured too long, the stone would hum back, a low resonance, like a drumbeat beneath the earth. The old man with the burned hands claimed he heard it speaking to him, said it was a god once, buried beneath a mountain long before the Lakota came. Said fire priests had sealed it there, walled it off in chambers of stone, fed it only warmth and breath. Said it had waited for a voice, a soul, to call it back. And that soul had been Martha's, because she built the box, laid the bricks, lit the first fire, and whispered her pain into its hollow heart. "It heard you," he said. Martha didn't argue. She hadn't been sleeping either. She no longer felt tired. She fed the Kang daily now, not just with firewood. She fed it words. She sat beside the crack and whispered what the others wouldn't say aloud, names of the dead, confessions, memories, guilt. She offered it what she had, stories, regret, hope, love, secrets, all of it. And in return, it stayed hot. The warmth never failed, even as food dwindled, even as another man failed to rise one morning, one of the Rourke boys, barely 20, frozen in a smile, arm draped across a stranger. Even as the last can of beans was opened, and nobody said a word about who would eat. The Kang kept them alive, but it was choosing now. The stronger ones began sleeping further from it, instinctively. Those who'd lost more, a spouse, a child, their land, somehow drifted closer each night. They pressed their spines to the stone, slept belly down on the bricks, let the heat wrap around them like arms. And one by one they went still, not in pain, not in fear, just still. And when they passed, the Kang glowed a little brighter. The crack widened, the hum deepened, and no one questioned it, not anymore. Sam was the first to speak up. "We need to stop it." He said it in a whisper, crouched beside Martha after dark, while Elijah dozed with the baby at the far end of the room. "It's eating people. It's keeping us alive," she replied. "But not all of us." He stared her down. "I counted, Ma. It's taken 12. We started with 28. 17, she corrected softly, "including us. Then when's it our turn?" She looked at the Kang. It pulsed faintly, like breath. "I don't think it wants us," she said, "but it wants someone." He was right. And that terrified her more than any storm, because it meant there was no end to the hunger, only a choice of who fed it. The next morning, Sam was gone. He left the rifle, left his boots, left only a note scratched in charcoal on the inside of the cabin door. "I won't be its fuel. I'd rather freeze with my own blood than burn with someone else's." Martha read it twice, then folded it and put it in her pocket. She didn't cry, but she lit the firebox that morning with more care than usual. She used dry wood, stacked it slow, whispered his name into the flue, and felt it take. The Kang stayed warm all day, and that night a fox lay dead on the porch. No prints, no wounds, just an offering, or a warning. By the 4th week of March, only 11 remained in the cabin. One mother had walked into the woods with her son, never to return. A man from Missouri slit his own wrists in the wash basin and told the Kang he was just getting ahead of the schedule. 3 others simply went to sleep and didn't rise. The heat never faltered. The crack now spanned the entire length of the Kang, not jagged but perfect, like a door waiting to be opened. Soft light bled from its seams at night, casting the rafters in flickering gold and red. The flue no longer took smoke. It exhaled a scent like wet stone and old paper. The baby had begun to speak, not words, but phrases. "She says we're safe," she told Elijah. "She who?" But she wouldn't say. She only pointed to the Kang, and when Elijah touched it, he said it whispered his name. Then came the thaw, abrupt. One morning the snowbanks collapsed. The trail emerged like a scar from the tree line. The first bird cried from a pine bough, hoarse and out of place, and the world came rushing back. Haynes arrived first, bloodied, limping, eyes wild. He'd survived alone. "Where are they?" he demanded, glancing past Martha's shoulder. "Who? Everyone. All of them. Are they alive?" She stepped aside, showed him the room. 10 others, half asleep, breathing, silent. He fell to his knees. "Lord Almighty, you did it. You kept them." She said nothing, but the Kang pulsed warm behind her, and the crack had stopped growing. That night she lit no fire. None was needed. Haynes left the next morning to gather others. He said he'd bring help, bring food, men, shovels. But Martha knew better. They would come for the warmth, not the people, not the truth, the warmth. She spent that day alone by the Kang. Elijah helped the others wash, clean, pack. The baby sat beside the stone, humming. And Martha whispered to the crack. She asked it questions. "Who are you? Why me? What do you want?" But the Kang gave no answers. Only warmth, only silence, only that slow, steady breath of radiant heat that reached deep into her bones and told her, "You're not done." She stared into the firebox. No wood now, no flame, just glow. And in that glow, Shapes moved. A hand, a face, a breath. She reached out, but didn't touch. Not yet. The others left at sunrise. Elijah begged her to come. "Ma, it's over. The snow's done. You don't have to stay." She kissed his forehead, held the baby one last time, and whispered, "She needs to be in the sun, not the stone." He nodded, eyes full, voice cracking. "I'll come back for you." "No," she said softly. "Don't." And she closed the door, nailed it shut from the inside. They say no one ever found her body. When they returned weeks later, the Wexler cabin stood untouched, warm, empty, silent. The Kang was gone, not broken, gone, no bricks, no stone, just a dark scar on the floor, warm to the touch, pulsing faintly like breath. Some said she'd joined her husband. Some said the stove had taken her. Some said she was still inside, whispering prayers to the thing beneath the flue, holding it back with her own heat, her own soul, so that no one else would ever burn. But those who survived, her children especially, never forgot. And when Elijah built his own cabin years later, far from that ridge, he built the hearth first, wide, low, and deep. He laid the stones himself and whispered as he placed each one, not in English, not in Chinese, but in that same quiet hum the Kang had once breathed into him long ago, on a winter no one should have lived through, and his children never felt the cold, not once, not ever again.